Hey, so guys, I wanted to just talk to you about the first module in Blackboard, which is over poetry. So let's see if we can take a quick look at that. I should be screen sharing now. So, all right, here we go. Again, make sure you've done that first assignment, get that out of the way. Then you're going to come down to lesson 1.1. And this is going to talk about what is a written argument and um, start you on some poems. So, if you look at the book, which, by the way, arguing about literature, I will be posting something a little later today about the online version of the book. The only thing I can tell you there, though, is I don't think it's any cheaper, at least substantially, than buying a paper copy of the book. I'm going to recommend that you do buy a paper copy of the book. Now, I will try to get my online version up here, but Macmillan's going to make you pay for that. It's not free. Um, so just keep that in mind. Um, all right. So the first thing it talks about is how do we do, or what is an argument? And this is on page 6 in your book. And it's going to talk about something called rhetoric. Now, remember, rhetoric is nothing more than the art of persuading somebody about something. Um, Usually in writing, sometimes it might be speeches, but if we want to persuade our audience about something, well, the first thing we got to do is make a claim. And a claim is your position on the argument. And then you're going to provide evidence, reasoning, assumptions, and you're going to probably use one of the major types of rhetoric. There's logos, ethos, and pathos. And those are all Greek words meaning logic, ethics, or emotion. All right. And I'll let you look in your book about what those are. But that's something we're going to definitely be using all throughout the semester. Now, there are 3 poems that start on page 159. And you got to read these poems and try to make some assumption about what they're talking about and all that good stuff. The first one is by Mary Oliver. It's called Singapore, and it's on page 159. And this is a real interesting poem. A woman, an American woman, walks into a restroom at the Singapore airport on her way home, presumably to the United States. And when she goes into the bathroom, she sees something a little bit disturbing. One of the stalls is open, and there's a woman kneeling next to the toilet doing something. Now, she makes some assumptions about what's going on there, but it turns out she's completely wrong. And once she reestablishes what's really happening here, she starts to notice the beauty in it. The second poem is called Blackberries on page 160. This is a memory poem about something that happened in the poet's childhood. We see a young boy with his dog, and he is picking blackberries in order to sell them. Now, he's pretty happy about life until he meets a car containing some children about the same age as him, and suddenly he feels not very good about his position. Third and last poem is called The Mill. Now, remember, a mill is a place where they used to grind uh, grains and turn them into flour. We do that on an industrial scale now, but back in the 1800s, it was done on a local scale. And this is kind of a story about what happens when technology puts you out of a job. Uh, do you go on or do you give up? It's kind of a sad poem, and I will tell you, there's a couple of deaths in this poem. You got to look carefully to see them. But again, I would suggest reading them a couple of times. Now, there's also a quiz on close reading, and all we really mean by close reading, and this is really important for a poem, You've got to read it once just to read it, a second time to try to get the meaning out of the poem, and at least a third time to look at the form of the poem. That's what I mean by a close reading. Now, once you've done all that, you can go ahead and take the quiz 1.1. When we move into lesson 1.2, it's going to remind you about MLA formatting. Let me just say this. Yeah, you've got to write a great essay. I want you to do that. But you've also got to format a great essay. And what I mean by that is you're going to have to use proper MLA format. Now, you should know what that is, but if you don't remember, make sure you're looking at the videos. I would definitely get on MLA.org, I believe, is the URL where the Modern Language Association has a lot of information. Just remember, you're going to have to know all that stuff, and we'll take a quiz over that. Now, lesson 1.3 is going to get a little bit further into poetry, and you're going to read a couple of classic poems. The first, these are both love poems. The first one is called How Do I Love Thee? And it's probably the most famous love poem ever written. I would imagine you've probably heard part of it. And this was written by a lady by the name of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She lived in the early 1800s, and she was from England. And she came from a wealthy family. She was a great poet, but she also married an even greater poet, a guy named Robert Browning. And she suffered from ill health. And let's be honest, she was an opium addict. She took opium to try to relieve some of her symptoms. Now, how much that came into play in her poetry, it's hard to say. But this is a poem that she wrote about the great love that she had for her husband, Robert Browning. Then there's a very different love poem called What Lips My Lips Have Kissed and Where and Why. This is written much later, about 100 years later. And here we have a poem about love lost, a remembrance of what it was like to be loved in a present where maybe the poet is not loved. And just to give you an idea about Edna Vincent Millay, as best we know, she was probably a bisexual. This may have been a poem written to another woman, hard to say for sure. But it's definitely a very different kind of love poem. When you get into lesson 1.4, you're going to learn about some different types of poems. Sonnets, very old form of poetry. A villanelle, very complicated form of poetry. Make sure you really read those carefully. Now, Death Be Not Proud was written back in the 1600s, and you may have a little trouble with it at first, but keep reading it. You can figure this out. Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. I would almost guarantee you've heard parts of that poem. It's very, very famous. And again, there's a lot of repetition in that poem. Why? Why does he do all that repeating? And again, as you get further on, you'll get a little deeper into the poetry until you get to the first essay. You're going to analyze two poems, and you're going to write a great essay about it. So just wanted to kind of preview some of that stuff for you. Remember, guys, these deadlines are going to come up really quick. Don't forget to work on your labs as well. And good luck on everything. Send me an email if you have questions. And I hope you have a great week. Thanks, guys.